Okay, let's talk about something that kind of blows my mind every time I think about it. The Japanese writing system. It's not just one alphabet.
No, definitely not. You've got hiragana, katakana, and then the big one, kanji.
Exactly, those characters they borrowed from China.
Yeah.
And the story of just the kanji, I mean, how they got to Japan and changed, it's a whole saga.
It really is. It shows you so much about how writing systems travel, how they get adapted. We're talking about symbols going back thousands of years.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're not just looking at, interesting shapes. We're really digging into where kanji came from, how Japan made them their own, and why they're still so central, even though, let's be honest, they can be pretty complex.
Mm. And we've looked at some articles on the history, the reforms, but also some really interesting online discussions. Learners, native speakers talking about their experiences.
Yeah, so we get the academic side and the real world feel because it's not just about memorizing characters, is it? It's about culture, history.
How language reflects a whole society.
So whether you're like actively learning Japanese or just curious about how writing systems work in different cultures, hopefully this deep dive will give you some aha moments, a better feel for this really vital part of Japanese culture.
Agreed. So where do we start? The origins. Back in China.
Let's do it. Where did these thousands of characters actually begin?
Okay, so the story starts way back. Ancient China. Our sources point to the earliest forms popping up around 2000 BC.
Yeah.
That's, wow, 4,000 years ago.
4,000. And they weren't for writing poems or anything initially, right?
Not at all. They were found on oracle bones, kututsumochi they call them, used for divination.
Right. I read about this. They'd heat up like turtle shells
Right.
or animal bones
Exactly. And then they'd interpret the cracks that formed.
as messages from the gods or ancestors.
Something like that, yeah. And the characters were basically records of those interpretations. It's kind of amazing to think writing started, in a way, from trying to read the future.
Wild. And there's that legendary figure, Kanji.
Ah, yes, Kanji. Around 2650 BC, legend says he invented Chinese characters. The story goes it was such a momentous thing that, spirits wept and the sky rained grain.
Shows you how important they considered the invention of writing, like world-changing importance.
Definitely puts it in perspective.
Okay, so fast forward quite a bit. How did these characters make the jump over the sea to Japan? It wasn't like someone just mailed them a dictionary.
Huh. No, not quite. It was gradual. Think about imported stuff, official seals, maybe letters between states, decorations on swords, coins.
Stuff that officials or elites would have handled?
Pretty much. The earliest actual artifact mentioned is a gold seal dated 57 AD, given as a gift from a Chinese emperor, supposedly.
57 AD. So the characters were physically present in Japan really early on, but maybe not widely understood.
Exactly. It probably took centuries for the knowledge of the script itself to really spread beyond a very small group.
Right. It's like seeing, I don't know, hieroglyphics on a museum piece. You see it, but you can't read it.
Good analogy. But then you get key people involved, like the scholar Wani.
Ah, yeah, Wani, early 5th century AD. From Korea, right? Baekje.
That's the one. He came from Baekje, one of the Korean kingdoms. Historical texts like the Nihon Shoki credit him with bringing over Confucian classics and, crucially, knowledge of the Chinese writing system.
So he was like a tutor to the imperial court or something?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
A major step in formally introducing and teaching the script.
And for a while, if you were writing in Japan, you were basically writing in Chinese.
Pretty much. Early documents, official records, a lot of that was composed in classical Chinese. It just shows the huge cultural influence China had at the time.
Okay, so the characters arrive. They're used by the educated, mostly in Chinese, but Japanese is a totally different language, grammatically, sound-wise. How did they start using these Chinese characters for Japanese words? That seems like the really tricky part.
That's where the real adaptation begins. It's fascinating. Around the mid-7th century, maybe 650 AD, we see something called manugana developing.
Manugana. Okay, what was that?
It was a clever system. They started using Chinese characters purely for their sound to represent Japanese syllables, pretty much ignoring the original Chinese meaning.
Ah, so if a Japanese word sounded like, say, yama, they'd find a Chinese character that was pronounced similarly, like san or something, and use that character just for the sound.
Exactly like that. The famous poetry collection, the Manushu, is full of it. That's where the name comes from. It was a massive step using a foreign script phonetically for the native language.
That is clever, like a code, almost. And that led to the kana we know today, hiragana and katakana.
Precisely. They evolved directly from this manugana.
How did that happen? They look so different.
Well, hiragana developed from writing manuscript characters in a very cursive, flowing style. Quickly.
Okay, like joined up writing.
Yeah. And because it was simpler and faster to write, it became really popular, especially among women at court during the Heian period. That's why it was sometimes called Under the Lady's Hand.
Wow. So the script itself has a social history tied to gender roles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Major works of literature from that era, like the Tale of Genji, were written primarily in hiragana by women.
That's incredible. Okay, and katakana, where did that come from? More angular, right?
Right. Katakana came about slightly differently. It seems Buddhist monastery students created it. They took parts of manigana characters, like just one radical or a simplified element, to use as phonetic markers.
So partial kana, like the name suggests. Kata meaning partial or side.
Exactly. They used it for things like pronunciation guides or annotations in Buddhist texts. More functional, perhaps, initially.
So both hiragana and katakana, the kana systems, they're basically streamlined descendants of kanji used for sound.
Kana literally means borrowed name, implying borrowed for sound. This is often contrasted with mana, meaning true name, which refers to kanji used for meaning.
Mana and kana, meaning and sound. Okay. But the innovation didn't stop there, did it? Japan actually made its own kanji.
Yes, kokuji they're called, or wasei kanji, Japanese-made kanji.
How does that even work? You can just invent a kanji.
Well, they didn't usually invent them from scratch. They typically combined existing kanji components in a new way to represent a native Japanese word or concept that didn't have a good equivalent in Chinese.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A classic one is dobu, or hataraku, meaning to work. It combines the person, radical, with the character for move. Makes sense, right? A person moving is working.
Yeah, that's quite intuitive. Are there many of these?
There are quite a few, though maybe not thousands. The main list for everyday use, the juice list, apparently includes about 9 kokuji. So not a huge number in common use, but they definitely exist.
Okay, so we've got this mix. Borrowed kanji, simplified kana derived from them, and even some homegrown kanji. It sounds potentially messy, which probably leads us to why they tried to reform things later on.
Exactly. Complexity was definitely an issue. The sheer number of characters, variant forms, multiple readings, it made literacy a challenge. So especially from the Meiji Restoration onwards, there were pushes for simplification.
Like standardizing English spelling back in the day, getting rid of weird variations.
That's a good parallel. One basic step was just deciding on a standard form for a character and discouraging variants. Like if there were 2 ways to write dog ni into a nu, they'd sort of unofficially or later officially favor one, usually the simpler or more common one.
Makes sense. Reduce redundancy. But I read they also did something stranger, substituting characters that sounded the same but meant different things.
Yeah, that happened too. Sometimes a complex character would be replaced by a simpler one with the same on-yomi, Chinese-based reading, even if the meaning wasn't quite the same.
That sounds like it could cause confusion.
It potentially could, yeah.
Yeah.
The example often given is the senk, meaning selection or screening. Apparently, it used to be written with different characters. Keen, also pronounced senk. The original characters meant something like measure and balance, which relates to selection, but the new ones mean choose and think.
Huh. So the sound won out over the original etymology, in a way.
In some cases, yes. And then during the Meiji era, Japan was importing tons of Western concepts: science, democracy, revolution.
Things they didn't have existing words, or maybe kanji compounds for.
Precisely. So they had to get creative. They started combining existing kanji to create new words for these concepts.
Like building blocks.
Exactly. Think of terms like sai kagaku for science, literally categorized learning, or kakume for revolution, change, mandate life. Even everyday things like wonton yubin for mail service and kite for postage stamp were coined then. A guy named Majima Hisoka is often credited with a lot of the postal terms.
Wow, so the writing system was actively being expanded to cope with modernization.
Very much so. And a huge step in standardization was establishing the Jude Kanji list.
Right, the list of common characters everyone learns in school. How many are on it?
It's been revised, but it's around 2,000 characters, currently 2,136, I believe. The idea was to create a baseline for literacy characters used in newspapers, official documents, basic education.
So does that mean kanji not on the list are, like, forbidden or just rare?
Not forbidden at all. They still exist and are used, especially names, literature, specialized fields. But if you use a non-Jew character in, say, a newspaper, there's a sort of accepted practice to include hiragana.
Ah, the little kana next to the character showing how to read it.
Exactly. It makes less common characters accessible. It's a pragmatic solution, really.
So even after reforms, it's still a pretty complex system. How do people feel about kanji today? What's their role now?
It's multifaceted. There's definitely a cultural weight. People still use left common kanji sometimes for stylistic reasons, like on New Year's cards, Ningaja.
Oh, yeah, like for the zodiac animal.
Exactly. Like in 2018, the year of the dog, you might see the more obscure kanji, used instead of them common too. It feels more traditional, maybe more sophisticated.
A bit like using Roman numerals sometimes in English for a formal feel.
Kind of, yeah. Advertisers sometimes do it too, using slightly uncommon kanji to seem refined or interesting.
Okay, but what about learners? We looked at those online discussions. Seems like a love-hate relationship.
Huh? That's a good way to put it. You see strong arguments on both sides. Some learners feel kanji are absolutely essential.
Why? What's the main benefit they see?
The biggest one is differentiating homonyms. Japanese has so many words that sound the same but mean different things. Kanji makes it clear which shush or shinpai you mean.
Right, if it was all in kana, it would be ambiguous
It's
sometimes.
very ambiguous, yes. And related to that, many feel kanji makes reading faster. Your brain processes the character or compound as a chunk of meaning, rather than sounding out syllables.
Like recognizing whole words in English instead of letter by letter.
Exactly that idea.
Yeah.
It creates visual landmarks in the text.
But then you have the other side, the sheer difficulty.
Oh yeah, the hate part of the love-hate.
Mhm.
Memorizing thousands of characters, each with multiple readings. It's undeniably daunting. Someone online called it like memorizing someone else's shorthand.
That really captures it. It is a kind of condensed code, isn't it?
It is. And many learners feel that while reading recognition is crucial, maybe writing them by hand is becoming less important.
Because of technology. We're all typing now.
Exactly. Your phone or computer suggests the kanji. You just need to pick the right one. So the argument goes, maybe intensive handwriting practice isn't the best use of time anymore.
Does that mean people's handwriting skills are declining, even native speakers?
There's definitely discussion around that. People joke about kanji amnesia, knowing the character when you see it, but being unable to recall how to write it from scratch. Relying on digital input methods might be weakening that recall ability.
I can relate to that with English spelling sometimes, relying on spell check. So, do native speakers ever just not know a kanji they encounter?
Oh, for sure. Especially with less common characters or specialized terms, or even just names. It happens. And there are even characters, gaiji, that aren't in standard computer fonts, used for obscure names or places sometimes.
Wow. Okay, so kanji clearly dominate, but they don't work alone. What about romaji using our Roman alphabet? Where does that fit in?
Romaji has its specific roles. It's essential for international communication passports, addresses sometimes, company names for global branding.
Right, and
Yeah.
for tourists.
Yeah.
Signs.
Definitely. Train station signs, menus, tourist info. Also crucial for language learners starting out to grasp pronunciation. And of course, it's how most people type Japanese on keyboards.
Using an IME, an input method editor, you type the sounds in romaji and it converts.
Exactly. Usually using the Hepburn system, which is the most common style of romanization. So it's very functional, but not really used for general Japanese writing between native speakers.
Gotcha. And how does the mix of kanji and kana actually work on the page? One thing that always strikes me is the lack of spaces in Japanese writing.
Yeah, that throws learners off at first. How do you tell where words begin and end?
Right. It looks like one long string.
But the mix of scripts actually helps with that. The dense, complex shapes of kanji stand out visually from the simpler, more flowing hiragana, used for grammatical endings, particles, native words without kanji, and the angular katakana, used for foreign loanwords, emphasis, onomatopoeia.
Ah, so the different visual textures of the scripts act like separators, taking the place of spaces.
In a sense, yes. Your brain learns to parse the sentence using those visual cues. The shift from kanji to hiragana often marks a word boundary or a grammatical function. It works surprisingly well once you're used to it.
That's a really neat way the system functions. Okay, we can't wrap up without tackling the biggest headache for many learners, the readings.
Ah, yes, the onyomi and kunyomi.
Right. One character, multiple ways to say it. Can you break down the difference again?
Sure, so onyomi, the sound reading, is based on the Chinese pronunciation of the character around the time it was borrowed into Japanese. But because it was borrowed at different times from different parts of China, a single kanji can even have multiple onyomi.
Okay, so that's the borrowed Chinese sound. What's kunyomi?
Kunyomi, the meaning reading, is the pronunciation of the native Japanese word that had the same or a similar meaning to the kanji. When the kanji was adopted, they basically said, okay, this character means mountain in Chinese, and our word for mountain is yama, so we'll also read this character as yama.
So they mapped the character onto existing Japanese vocabulary.
Exactly. And most kanji have at least one onyomi and one kunyomi. Some have several of each. Some only have one type. The kukuji, the Japanese-made ones, usually only have kunyomi.
And which reading you use depends on.
Context. Usually, if a kanji is part of a compound word with other kanji, you use the onyomi. If it's standing alone, often with hiragana endings, ukurigana, you use the kunyomi. But there are many exceptions.
Of course there are. It sounds like you just have to learn the reading for each word.
Pretty much, yeah. It's vocabulary learning. And then you get things like ateji and jukujikun to make it even more fun.
Ah, boy, what are those?
Ateji is when characters are used purely for sound again, often for foreign words or names, ignoring the meaning entirely. Think of how sushi might be written. The characters mean like longevity and manage, totally unrelated.
Okay, just borrowing the sound. And jukujiku.
That's where a specific kanji compound has a reading that is a native Japanese word, but that reading has nothing to do with the individual sounds of the characters. The classic example is pupacho. The characters mean now, ima, kon, and morning, yuka. But together they're read kessa, the native Japanese word for this morning.
So you can't sound it out using on or kun readings. You just have to know that ukuhya.
Exactly. It's like the whole compound is the word. And sometimes furigana is even used creatively, like in manga, to give a totally non-standard reading to a character for effect.
Man, it just keeps getting deeper. The layers of complexity are
It
amazing.
really is a system with incredible depth and history baked into it.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've traced kanji from ancient Chinese oracle bones all the way to their role in modern digital Japan.
We saw how they were adopted, how Japan created kana from them, even how they made their own kokuji.
Right, and we looked at the reforms trying to tame the complexity and the ongoing debate, the value versus the difficulty, especially for learners.
It's clear they're more than just letters. They're tied up with history, culture, identity.
Definitely. So thinking about the future, you've got the benefits differentiating words, that visual chunking for reading speed, the connection to meaning. But you also have the massive memorization challenge, especially when technology helps us bypass writing them by hand. Where do you see it going?
That's the big question, isn't it? Will technology lead to less emphasis on kanji mastery? Or will their benefits, especially for reading clarity in a language full of homonyms, ensure they remain absolutely central? Maybe technology will find new ways to help us use them without the same memory burden.
Yeah, will it be simplification?
Yep.
Or maybe a tech-assisted status quo? Or even a resurgence of appreciation for the depth they offer? It's fascinating to think about.
It really is how language and writing evolve with society and technology.
Absolutely. Well, that leads us to you, listening. What are your thoughts on kanji? If you've learned Japanese, what was your experience? Any characters you love or really struggled with?
Yeah, we'd love to hear your stories or any questions you still have. Let's keep the deep dive going in the comments or on our community forum.